I've always been interested in the edges, the margins, the extremes, so perhaps it's unsurprising that what I chose to study for our Learn Something New project is the intertidal zone. The intertidal zone describes both the geographical boundaries, the area between the extremes of high and low tide, and the ecosystem that lives between those boundaries. However, I didn't select the intertidal zone for its edginess. More practical factors came into play. I have two partners in learning, Vaughn and Zane, and we needed a topic we all agreed upon that wasn't too expensive and that we could conveniently study. Also, anything that gets us out in the world is a good thing. When I suggested we learn about the intertidal zone, my boys were thrilled at the prospect of finding mermaids' purses, which are empty shark egg cases, and octopuses, the holy grail of tide pooling. But the biggest inspiration by far was my friend and colleague Dawn Murray Osborne, who has a PhD in ocean sciences and whose area of expertise is the intertidal zone. Her office is filled with intriguing artifacts from her explorations of the Santa Barbara shores, and her passion for her work is infectious. What sealed the deal on this subject was her willingness to act as a learning guide for my family. In early September, Dawn and I discussed where my learning should begin. At my request, she suggested some books. One she said she loved was a textbook, Marine Biology, an Ecological Approach, which proved to be way out of my depth, and honestly, it didn't inspire me as it did her. But I like to begin learning by reading, so I searched for blogs about intertidal life, and when none turned up, I was off to the public library, where I found several books that fit my needs. Some Berkeley Press publications that combined coffee table book-style pictures with scientific information. This seemed like a great start. I learned about the 4 different horizontal levels that make up the intertidal zone. Armed with some new knowledge, my boys and I went out to the seashore. We hit the beach at low tide with the intention of hopefully discovering some exciting, exotic creatures. And while it's true that we noticed a lot more, we didn't see anything new, and it wasn't long before we succumbed to our typical beach behavior. In early October, I asked Dawn what to study next. She told me to look into echinoderms, a weird class of creature that includes sea urchins, sea cucumbers, sea stars, sand dollars. This is an odd family considering that some members are soft-bodied and some are spiky and some are very hard. What they all share, though, is a hydraulic propulsion system that uses tube feet for locomotion and a body that is made of 5 segments, whether it's obvious to you and me or not. Dawn also directed me to find out about the relationship between mussels and sea stars. Sea stars love to eat mussels and help keep the mussel population in check. Most of the learning my boys and I did up to this point followed a fairly traditional cognitive learning perspective. We relied on reified knowledge that increased our vocabulary and gave us a theoretical understanding of interspecies relationships. In addition to reading books and watching videos, we also went to museums and sea centers with touch tanks to learn more. But we really weren't getting anywhere in the discovery of creatures. In fact, my boys were not feeling optimistic that we could find anything at all.
Written from the live video we watched, this beach is not. And written from how many times I've been here, we will not find anything very interesting at this beach.
What became obvious to me, and rather a source of frustration for the boys, was that while books and videos and touch tanks were helpful in gaining an understanding of how all the intertidal species fit together, they couldn't help us situate that knowledge in a practical way that would actually help us identifying the more hidden species when we were on our own, out in the wild. And let's be clear, finding the less obvious sea creatures was the initial draw of this project. In the intertidal zone, the ability to see is crucial. This expert guidance came as we joined Dawn and one of her classes on a field trip. She brought along her boys, who turned out to be expert creature finders. Dawn told me that she plans these field trips around low tides and her boys' schedules because she needs them to go out and forage for creatures while she talks with her classes. The relationship between Dawn and her children became one of the more interesting and unexpected aspects of my learning. Those boys have grown up in the tide pools of Santa Barbara, and in a very natural way, she's introduced them to the ecology of the intertidal zone. As my boys and I spent more time with this family, it became obvious that Dawn had created an informal apprenticeship of ocean ecology for her children. They could not only identify and find all manner of creature, they knew what she was looking for and what she valued.
See here?
See here?
On the job.
Eggs. She really likes eggs. As this project drew to a close, I kept wondering if there were other ways we could have learned. I asked Dawn if she knew of any groups or organizations that would help a person learn more about the ecology of the intertidal zone, and she couldn't think of one. There really is no community of practice around the intertidal zone. Still, it felt like I and my boys had entered into a micro-community of practice. Dawn holds both the structured knowledge about the intertidal zone and the relationships of the plants and animals that are found there, and also has the ability to see through the camouflage, spot indicator species, and draw inferences from the natural world. She passes down this knowledge to her children as they're ready, and they're learning how to teach others. An interesting thing happens when Dawn is out tide pooling. She becomes a sort of Pied Piper, and people gather around her and ask questions. Perhaps this is because there are no formal community of practice, and people are excited to discover someone who can help shed some light on an area that seems mysterious to them. Or perhaps they're merely amazed at the creatures in her bucket. In this small, brief way, people are welcomed in as legitimate peripheral participants, and then they leave, well before gaining anything resembling expertise, but taking with them a little bit about our world that they didn't have before. While spending time with Dawn's family, mine caught a glimpse of the life of intertidal zone experts and apprentices. With some more time, up to our knees and elbows, looking hard, patiently turning over rocks, and hanging out with his family, we might even become novices.